just maybe you can record this. I know that Megan wanted to hear this. Are you recording?
I just started.
Okay, good. So how many of you have taken formal refuge in a refuge ceremony and taken refuge vows? Okay, good. So that gives me an idea. And it doesn't matter if you do or you don't. It doesn't even matter if you're Buddhist or not, because the first thing is that refuge is really a universal principle. And I like to always remember that. I always like to remember the universalness of spirituality. And I really, really like what is called, comparative religion, because otherwise I think we are just too prone to nurturing being doctrinarian and in the end, being separatist and against others. And that's kind of like the opposite of growing towards the all one. So if there's anything at all I want you to remember, then that's that. And what I want to be talking about in this class is in two sections. So I want to talk about what refuge is, that it is a state of mind and what state of mind it is. And then afterwards, I want to talk about taking refuge as a preliminary practice and how to do the meditation and mantra recitation. So there are these two parts to my teaching today, hopefully. And they obviously have to do with one another, and I might be jumping a little bit between the two. So the first thing is like, what is refuge? And when we take refuge, it's like taking shelter, right? So you're in the forest and the thunderstorm starts and you're running for refuge under the branches of a tree, and you're trying to find shelter from the rain and possibly the thunder and lightning. And that's a state where we're kind of like in, a state of upheaval or maybe even panic, going, oh my God, I need help, right? So that's when we need refuge. It's a state where we're like, oh my God, I need help. And the reason why I'm choosing that example is because then there can be two reactions. There can be this helpless reaction. We go into victim mode, like, oh God, somebody come rescue me. Let me dial 911. So they send out a rescue squad to the forest here so I'm safe from the rain. Or you say, I'm capable. I can take care of this myself. I can find a solution and get myself to safety. So there's a very basic difference in quality of students, right? So are you the kind of person on the spiritual path who's always screaming like, mommy, come help me? Or are you the kind of spiritual person saying like, I can do this, I'm capable, I can find a solution to get myself out of trouble? And it has been said by some people that the big difference between Christianity and Buddhism is how we go into this refuge. It's like, how do I come into my spiritual path? Which in Christianity, we're quite literally told, you're the child of God, right? And you say, Daddy, hold my hand. And which is, I think, in many ways why that was never attractive to me, because I didn't trust Daddy. I'm like, I don't even know you. They say you're this old guy with a great beard sitting on a throne in a cloud. And that doesn't sound very attractive to me. Why would I rely on you? I've never seen you, you know, what are you going to do for me? Whereas in Buddhism, we're not asked to be a child. By and large, you're supposed to get yourself enlightened. So I am really, you know, being stereotypical right now, so that in Christianity, it's like, if I'm a good child, you know, and I eat up my plate and clean up my plate after the meal, Big Daddy is gonna help me, so I'm safe, right? I'm being really, really over the top here. Whereas in Buddhism, it's like, I'm a Buddhist, I'm enthused about being a Buddhist because I will get myself enlightened and I'll solve all the problems myself, all the problems that life might be throwing me. And there are some people, and I've talked to some people who say, like, who's going to help you if you're in trouble as a Buddhist if you don't have God? You know that Buddhism is a non-theistic religion or philosophy. That means there is no God. God's not going to bail you out. You're going to bail yourself out, right? And I know people who are literally creeped out by that. They're like, what? Like, God's not going to come and take my hand? And who am I going to pray to? So in some sense, if you want to be a little child, like if you want to be a toddler on the spiritual path, it's actually better for you to stay in Christianity, because you can always say, God, Daddy, come solve my problem. Whereas in Buddhism, it's always like, okay, scratch my head. What do I remember that I was supposed to be doing in this situation as an antidote to change my karma, to make life better for myself, right? So there is, of course, also an element of prayer and asking for grace and things like that. But that is not Buddhist type of refuge. So, and I will have to say that when I say see people go into Buddhism with that attitude of like, if I'm a good girl, will I get the reward, you know? Will I get the candy at the end? That I cringe, because there's a profound misunderstanding. And like, I loved Buddhism when I heard about it, because it's basically saying like, okay, are you going to be responsible for your own life? And because at that time I was already a fully trained psychotherapist, where, you know, the whole training is about taking responsibility for your half of reality and what happens to you, I really found that very, very attractive. So that is really the first thing I want to say about taking refuge is, does that sound good for you to say, I take responsibility for what happens to me? And Buddhism, because of karma, is asking you to be ultimately responsible for what happens to you, because Buddhism says you create your karma. Well, if it's me creating my karma, which is everything that happens to me, then am I willing to deal with it like that, you know? Am I willing to say, okay, can I learn to take actions all along the path to make life better for myself? So I really liked it. I really liked the Buddhist approach of saying, I'll be in charge of my own life. And so we take refuge into the Guru, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. This is the refuge formula or the refuge mantra, and we'll be talking about what that really means in the superficial sense that's easy to mistake, and in the ultimate sense, the universal principle that's behind it. But again, really what refuge is an inner state of mind. And what is that state of mind? It's a state of mind where you realize that in that moment where you want to scream, Mama, help me, that you're not screaming to something on the outside, but to something on the inside, that you're taking refuge to your own ability to help yourself. Now that is hard if you're not well trained in Buddhism. And the idea is, of course, see, Buddhism is very different from some of the other religions because it's a philosophy, not a religion. You're supposed to go in with a good education. You're supposed to go in with a clear understanding of what you're doing, right? You're supposed to already have learned a lot, heard a lot. You're supposed to truly understand what it is. They think it's not all right to just think Buddha looks cool, so therefore let me go into the refuge ceremony and take refuge vows. They think that's very superficial and it won't hold up. You know, it's like people who convert to Christianity because they think God sounds cool, and then they go to a difficult patch in their life, like a tough divorce, and God doesn't sweep down to bail them out, and then they lose faith. It's not supposed to be like that. So refuge is the moment when you say, like, I can liberate myself, because being a Buddhist is about becoming enlightened, and enlightened means you set yourself free, you know. So in last Saturday's class, I talked about making the mind wide and spacious, you know. So enlightenment is a path where we're trying to make our mind as spacious and wide and inclusive and all one with everything as possible. But it's, of course, also where we set ourselves free from everything that holds us back. And that's something we do in our own mind. You know, it's not like you sit and you go, Buddha, you know, I feel narrow-minded. Come down and help me. So, of course, you know, thinking about Buddha, calling upon Buddha, praying to Buddha, if you understand what the Buddha stands for as a universal principle, can be very inspiring, you know, and you can think like, wow, man, if I remember what the Buddha really means, then it can help me feel more spacious and more free. And it can inspire me to say, let me do something similar to help myself. So I like the way Lama Yeshe talks about Buddhism. He always calls it self-therapy, you know. So refuge is also the mind where you remember that everything you learned, which is the Buddhist teachings, that's the Dharma, everything you learned in your Dharma class is supposed to be self-therapy. So he used to give talks saying things like, the talk is how to become your own therapist. And he was not just saying that flippantly. He had systematically studied Western philosophy and psychotherapy in depth. He was very respectful of it. And actually, as a psychotherapist, I can say that anybody who does psychotherapy and it works out well, it means you learn the tools and you start to use them on yourself, and you start to therapeutize yourself, you know. You get depressed again, you're like, oh, what was that again? Oh, I was supposed to remember I'm in the here and now, and I was supposed to remember to feel my breath. I was supposed to remember something positive, you know? So you do self-therapy and you talk yourself out of it, quite literally, you know? So that is refuge. Refuge is setting your own mind free, running for cover to all the things you've learned that can help you setting yourself free. And this is meant literally. If you think of your body and the limited parts of your mind and emotions, if you think of that like a cage, it quite literally means opening the gate so the bird inside the cage can hop to the door and start flying off and soaring. It's quite literally that what it means. So taking refuge is also not just the initial moment where you're opening the gate to the cage, but it's also the state where you flap your wings, you start to fly, you take off and you soar. That is, of course, as you're going deeper into your practice and you're becoming more liberated and free. That is also refuge. So we do say it's the entry gate. It's the first moment you become a Buddhist. That's true, and it's also not true. I mean, it's not the beginning, because the beginning is you need to just even hear about Buddhism, and you need to hear all kinds of things until you become educated enough where there's this moment, this tipping point where you go like, ooh, I want to take refuge, which again is not the outer ceremony or formula. That almost doesn't matter. It's this inner tipping point where you say, yes, I want to be on this path. I want to do these things to get myself to freedom and to set myself free. That's the real moment where you take refuge in your heart, right? So at that moment, it can be helpful to take the outer refuge ceremony and the outer refuge vows and all of those things. But that's not true refuge. And a lot of people, especially in Nepal and India, even in the West, they go for the refuge ceremony because it's fun. It's the latest party game. It sounds so cool. You know, your friends have done it out of curiosity and all of those things. And that's, of course, not what it's supposed to be. I mean, it wouldn't occur to any of you to say, oh, let me, you know, get baptized as a Catholic because it sounds so cool, or because my friends did it, you know, or I'll convert to Judaism because, you know, it's exotic. Because we understand, because that's from within our culture, we understand that it's a little bit more serious than that. There's some kind of commitment we take, right? We understand that if I go to the church, to the priest to say, please baptize me, and he sprinkles this water on my head, that I'm kind of committing myself to something kind of deep and long term. And taking refuge is the same thing. It's like you're taking the commitment long term, seriously, to be on that path to setting yourself free. And so people used to really hate me, you know, when I was at the Lamram November course in Nepal. You know, you go through the whole teaching course for several weeks and then you can take refuge. And then the new people would ask the older students like me, should I do it? You know, and I say, well, how do you feel about it? I talk with them a little bit. And a lot of them just said, oh, it just sounds cool. And, you know, now's a good time to do it. And when will I get another chance? But they didn't actually say, this is my life. You know, this is my path. And then I said to them, like, don't do it. Don't take refuge. And then they'd get angry at me. Why not? Well, it's not like eating chop suey. You know, it's not an exotic dish you taste. It's you're standing there in front of the divine saying, I'm committing myself to becoming enlightened, you know? So I've got a lot of people get very angry at me. Or, you know, I'd get these answers like, yeah, no, I'm not really sure if I want to be a Buddhist. You know, I'm also exploring other spiritual paths, and I'm really, really interested in Native American spirituality and sweat lodges. And it's like, yeah, you can do sweat lodges and be a Buddhist. But, you know, if you're talking that wishy-washy, then you are so far from taking refuge. That's not the point or the moment of taking refuge ceremony. So nobody is ever excluded. Buddhism is very inclusive, but then you've missed the point. And maybe I'm German and more strict or something like that. You know, we're supposed to be like more disciplined or something like that. I'm like, no, you take refuge, and you should at least think about it, you know? So you should have spent a moment with yourself in your heart, outside of does it sound cool and exotic, of where you're deciding like this is it for not even just for the rest of my life, but for the rest of all of my lifetimes, right? That's the moment when you take refuge. And I'm talking universal now, that it should even feel the same for whether or not you want to be a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian. It doesn't matter what, or Native American Indian. You shouldn't take it lightly. It's too important. You should make it important. It should be important to you. And I know I shouldn't say should, but you should, because it's just true, right? So it's like you shouldn't just go stand in front of, in the runway at JFK just because flippantly it sounded good, It's like where the Boeings come down. No, you should really think about it because you might wind up dead and flat. So it's a little bit like that. So if you really think about refuge, it's really actually a matter of life and death. It's not like you're going to drop dead in your physical body if you don't take refuge, but what you do with your life spiritually is like the tipping point. It gives a spin spiritually for the rest of eternity, for all your incarnations. That's not a small thing. That's huge, And the whole point is, again, that Buddhism likes people to be educated before they take refuge, so they can even have thoughts like that. Was I at that point of depth of understanding when I took refuge? Hell no. But I was very enthused, and I had this feeling of like, this is it for the rest of all of my lifetimes. Then can it wear off later? Yeah, it can, and that's okay. But I think that at least in the moment we take the refuge ceremony, we should feel that way. And then afterwards, we shouldn't take refuge for granted. It's like we always say, don't take your relationship for granted. It needs care and maintenance. If you're married, if you have a partner, you need time alone, like really good quality time together to nurture and take care of the relationship. But it's the same between you and your spiritual path. It's not just a given. It's not a karma that will just ripen and boom, you're there and you're almost half enlightened. It's not like that. It needs a lot of care. So just think about all the care you need to give to your body every boring day. Get up in the mornings, brush your teeth, floss your teeth, brush your hair, wash your face, cream, lotion, shower, toilet paper, nail clipping. I mean, it doesn't end. You haven't even started dressing yourself. You should put such incredible amount of maintenance into your physical body. So what about your mind, your spirituality? That's part of refuge, is to always run back for cover and say, actually, it's a lot more important that I take care of my mind and my happiness, because my body will betray me in the end. It will fall to pieces and drop dead. It will literally die on me. And then what? Then all I'm left with is my mind. So I have to, in Buddhism, there's always this switch from the outer to the inner. So basically, any kind of topic in Buddhism, you can teach it in terms of outer, inner, and secret aspects, or the relative and the absolute. So refuge is very much has to do with this mega moment where we realize, like, whoa, I'd better, switch from the outside to the inside in my life. And that's true for any spiritual tradition where you make the inner life more important. And it's more important to you. Why? Because you realize that in the end, that's what's going to give you happiness. So that any amount of chocolate you might ever have in your life ultimately will not make you happy in the absolute sense, only in the relative fleeting sense. So then the best thing you can do with the most delicious chocolate you might have is offer it on your altar to make some merit, to create some good karma, so you'll have better happiness in the future. Later, you can take it down from your altar and eat it. But, first things first. So take care of your mind first, right? So what's very important for Buddhists is not to have the victim attitude of like, ooh, I'm helpless, I'm no good, there's nothing I can do, I need somebody else to rescue me. And there are moments definitely where we feel like that. Everybody does, when it gets really bad in life. And that's where it's great to have studied the Lamrim, which is the step-by-step path to enlightenment, because this is a very, well-liked modern term in American English. It's your toolbox, then you have a toolbox. So there are all these topics you study in the Lamrim, and they're like meditations and considerations for different moments. So why am I freaking out now and I feel like I want to scream for mommy? Is it because I'm in physical pain, because I'm too poor, because I feel emotionally down, because I don't have a partner? What is it, because in all the teachings there's something that you have learned in terms of philosophy and meditation that's supposed to help you climb out of that dark hole you fell in. And honestly, I've studied pretty much everything there is to study in Buddhism, and there's always a technique for everything. The problem is just it's a lot, takes a lot of time and dedication to know them all and to practice them all and to master them all to the point where you can help others with them. And so that is kind of like the first point that we're having. The first point is, I take refuge in the Guru. And that sounds really foo-foo and flaky and woo-woo and totalitarian and like glitzy and all kinds of things. I actually pretty much hate the word guru because it's become so worn down in Western parlance throughout these 30 years of New Age. So I really like to say teacher instead, because it cuts through all of this. I think you know what I mean, all this ornate confusion surrounding this term and all the abusiveness of it and all of that. So the first thing you take refuge in is your teacher. It's like, you don't know how to drive your car in a blizzard of sheet ice. Well, go see a qualified driving teacher who can explain to you how to grip the steering wheel and drive on ice. It's exactly the same. There's no difference. And we shouldn't get all like confused about it, There's a lot of confusion. I remember at a certain point getting really upset about all the projections flying right, left, and center about Guru. And I said to one of the very, very well-trained senior Western Buddhist students in the position of a Lama, I said, God, is it really any different from learning to play the piano, where you just always try to find the next person who's ahead of you and can explain to you the next trick of how to train your fingers, and how you have to like pass your thumb under the other fingers and all of those things, and how to exactly press the keys down and stuff like that. And he said, no, there's no difference. It's exactly like that. So forget about guru. Going refuge to the principle of the teacher is just like when you try to find a person who can show you how to ride a horse, bake a pie, or do hands-on healing. You find a person who knows more than you, who's ahead of you, and you just say, can you please show me? They show you, you train, you advance. It's no more complicated than that. And we'll go more into it later, but it's really just like that. There is something that I hopefully will remember to talk about when we talk about taking refuge in the Guru, is that the word guru and the principle of a teacher has a certain cultural way of being understood in Indian culture. It's a completely guru-based culture, guru worship-based culture. And I think there's unfortunate ways in which it has been taken on board or in which it has been transplanted to the West. That has led to confusion, misunderstandings, fantasies, and a lot of abuse in all directions. And that's not helpful. It works really well within the traditional Indian cultural context, but we don't live in that context. So I don't think it's particularly helpful for us, especially here we're all women, you know, as Western women in a Western context, it's not particularly helpful. So the first thing in taking refuge is to make that shift from the outer to the inner. So that in Buddhism, if you hear enough teachings, you'll realize that everything always ties in back in with everything else. You know, it's the everything always loops back to everything else kind of philosophy. So the first step of refuge for me ties in with the principle of renunciation. And that ties in with the most basic aspect of Buddhism. So the word for Buddhism in Tibetan language isn't what we call it. So Buddhism is like making a noun out of the word Buddha, right? Who is the founder of the religion. So the Tibetan word for Buddha is Sangye, and to make it a noun, you would like a person would be Pa, but we don't say Sangyepa. That word doesn't even exist, you know? So if I had to take Buddhist and retranslate it literally into Tibet, it would be Sangyepa, but that's not at all what they call themselves. They rarely make reference to themselves as Buddhists. And the word for a Buddhist is Nangpa. Nangwa means inside. So if I want to say I'm putting the juice in here, then I would say Shela Nangwa Luk. So I'm putting it inside the glass. I mean, literally inside. So Nangpa means insider. So quite literally, the word for Buddhist means the person who turns inwards, right? So that's the most basic thing. I mean, if there's one thing I want you to remember about this class is refuge is a state of mind. It's a state of mind of saying, forget about the outside world, let me turn inside. Help is on the inside. That's what it means. Help is on the inside because my mind is on the inside and I'm going to help myself. So we don't want to, renunciation means I don't think that ultimately I will be helped by outside objects, you know, things like chocolate and cats and pie and all those things. They're in the end meaningless. And as I said, all the meditations always loop back in on another. So there's this whole chapter where you meditate on death and impermanence. So why are the outside things not important? Because you're going to lose every single one of them the moment you die. So we are asked to meditate about the fact that when we die and we leave our bodies, we can't take anything with us. I can't take of my precious body that I spend hours every day maintaining. I can't even take a single hair. You know, I cannot take anything at all that I own. There's things cluttered all around me that I own, and I will not be able to take anything, not one penny. One classical example is that one of the High Lamas of the past asked rich person, very rich person, was very, very attached to their wealth, to meditate on the fact that he could, once he would pass the threshold of death, he wouldn't even be able to take a single sewing needle with him, let alone, you know, jewels and gold. So That is what it is. We will not be able to take even one thing with us. So why then cling on to it? We are, of course, invited to have a happy life and make use of things around us, but it's more helpful to think of them that, like the attitude you have in a hotel room. You use everything, you enjoy it, but it's just transitory. You just arrived and you'll be leaving again. And it's the same here. I'm surrounded by so-called my stuff, but I just arrived and I'll be leaving again, and it will all stay behind. So no use to run for refuge to it, because in the end, either it will fall to pieces, it'll be used up, it'll burn down, or I'll die. One way or another, it will not last, right? So there's this huge shift in taking refuge towards the inside. And so the whole Lamrim, the whole graduate or step-by-step path to enlightenment makes us understand that happiness and joy ultimately doesn't come from things we own and from the outside, but comes from the inside. So also I really like Lama Yeshe. He was the founder of the FPMT. He was a really wild and crazy yogi. He was extremely ahead of his time. He was the first truly modern Lama. And he said all these really cool things like, happiness is an inside job, and it is. So refuge is realizing, oh, happiness is an inside job. I'm making myself happy, right? For instance, by stop being worried about how much money I have in the bank account, or by no longer caring about the next generation iPhone or whatever it may be, you just let go. So refuge, as you get to this tipping point where you switch, there is this moment where you realize that you take refuge to your own inner wisdom. Because there's no use in saying, okay, I'll take refuge to myself, my mind. If it doesn't have wisdom, then what are you going to do when misery strikes? So that's why we take refuge to the Dharma, to the teachings, because they teach us wisdom. They teach us how to think and how to handle reality when misery strikes. And what I really like about Buddhism is that it's so technically precise about misery, right? In Christianity, they just says, life is a misery, pray to God. That's not exactly very well, it doesn't satisfy my intellectual mind. Whereas Buddhism goes about like, there's this kind of suffering, that the suffering of old age, and the suffering of sickness, and the suffering of attachment, and every time they give you exactly what to do, how to think it, how to change your mind, how to antidote it, how to turn that into happiness. I think that's good. So in Buddhism also, students are invited to be intelligent. When you really get down to it, the scriptures say every Buddhist should be smart. They say, be smart, be intellectual, ask questions, think about it, question things. We talked about it in the class from last Saturday, that these different Buddhist schools would debate each other, and even with non-Buddhist schools and in ancient India, and that there was this rule: whoever can't come up with the last best winning argument has to give up their philosophy and convert to the winner's viewpoint, because obviously the argument was better. So if you can't come up with a really great argument for why the creator God exists and sits in a throne in the clouds with his long beard and his white fluttery dress, then you have to give up that point of view and change to whoever has a better argument, right? So that is the Buddhist tenet. And I like that because you get to question things and you're supposed to. So refuge is not some kind of befuddled, dazed, drugged state, like you just took pot and you go like, whoa, Buddhism is so cool, you know, it makes me feel good. It's not like that at all. It's that you're intelligent, that you're saying, man, this is so compelling. This is what I want for myself. So it's very sober, it's very clear, a very clear kind of a state of mind. And so the feeling is, again, what we talked about last week, is that should give your mind a kind of a feeling of the door opening. Remember how I said it's like the bird leaving the cage and the gate is open and it spreads its wings and it flies and it takes space. So taking refuge is supposed to be this feeling of like, wow, okay, I'm opening up to something much greater and wider than I was in before. So, and then there are all these different techniques that we can have for liberating ourselves and making our mind happy, turning things into happiness. So just to mention some, it's not like Buddhism is saying, okay, if you eat chocolate, be miserable because it's outside pleasure. No, not like that at all. It's like, just do it in a way that you make it even better by making it into good karma. So it will help you get enlightened. How to eat chocolate on the path to enlightenment. That's what Jimpa always teaches, you know. And then it's also this, what I'm more interested in teaching is that we tend to believe that objects are solid. And I talked about that, you know, last weekend, you know, and for those of you who were here, I forgot to say that actually, I think I got into this, or I had the great karma, or it was fitting to my karma that my physics teacher in my last 2 years of school, he had actually been a research fellow at the Berkeley Research Center for Particle Physics in the 60s and 70s, when they were like doing this mind-blowing research on quantum physics. And then he got disappointed by the fact that these things were used to make better bombs, essentially for killing. And he became a Rudolf Steiner school teacher, you know, in a spiritual school instead, where he was my school teacher. And he taught us physics as if it were philosophy. And it was just absolutely mind-blowing. And the most basic thing once you get into particle physics is to understand that objects are not solid. This may look solid, but it's not. It's mostly made up out of space, right? Like when you start to look, which is what we always say in Buddhism, you start to look at the object, you analyze, and you can't find it. And that's what happens in physics. They look at the objects, they analyze it, and first thing they say, it's not solid. And second, we don't find anything. We look at matter and we don't find matter, we find space. That sounds exactly like what the Buddhist Lama is saying. And that's basically what the teachings on emptiness say. So what I love to always talk about is to say, to remember that things are not solid. We are not solid. Our body is not solid. Everything is space, you know. And then I went into medical school and they teach you how the radioactive radiation whooshes through. It doesn't even hit any of the subparticles of the tissues of the molecules in your body, because there's just space everywhere, you know. So it is true. So we, even from our culture, acknowledge that is true, that things are not solid. So don't get so fixated on them. Even yourself and your own body is not so solid. And it's this softening, letting go of your solid grip on reality that is setting your mind free, and that is refuge. So So that is true refuge. And then you can still, you know, have an altar and a Buddha image and all of those things, because you understand that there are symbols, you know. You don't think anymore that, like in the Buddhist cultures, people are often illiterate. They have very little understanding of the philosophy. So they are just, like in the olden days here, people were just Christians out of habit, right? So we don't need to copy people in places like Thailand who go and just always say, oh, Buddha, blah, 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 and offer this and that and the other, because it's often in their culture become an empty ritual. So we don't need to do that. We are Westerners. We're very highly educated. Our intellect is very, very trained. So we should really say, no, no, I'm going to take refuge the intelligent way because my intellect is trained. That doesn't mean you can't ever have a Buddha statue to remind you of that, right? But it becomes just the reminder of the inner thing. And we'll be getting into it a little bit more, and we'll understand that really how you develop refuge as a realization. Realization means it's stable in your heart, it stays with you all the time, is through meditation. And there are many different meditations. So, and I want to end by talking about the formal refuge meditation in the second part. So, you can have your altar, Buddhist style or whatever, to remind you that you're supposed to meditate on refuge. The meditation has these 4 aspects of, I go for refuge to the Guru, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. I like to not make it sound wrong, like to say to the principle of the Guru, or even I like to say the universal principle of the Guru, the universal principle of the Buddha, the universal principle of the Dharma, and the universal principle of the Sangha. Because that way I can pull it out of a Tibetan cultural context, which that's already wrong or too narrow. So it's actually even more large. It's like I go for refuge to the universal principle of guru-ness, of teacherhood, of what spiritual teacherness means, which is ultimately guide me. That's what I'm going to refuge to. Anything that can ultimately guide me and pull me towards enlightenment. That is my teacher. If that's a red traffic light, that red traffic light is your guru. If that is somebody who gets aggressive towards you, that person is your guru, because it's teaching you, pulling you towards enlightenment. Right? So it's not, the guru is not, or it's very narrow understanding of guru if you think it's one person, you know, okay, that one person is my guru. And even then, you're not supposed to take refuge into the personality, human aspect of that person, but in the teacherness, the principle of teaching that's behind that human narrowness. You know, you're not supposed to take refuge to the fact that your human guru is taking naps at noontime. That's ridiculous, but a lot of people do, right? Or whatever he or she eats. You're supposed to take refuge to the fact that they are able to teach you the next step and pull you along. And the spiritual teacher in Buddhism is never supposed to think that they are the teacher, right? Oh, I'm so cool because I can teach Buddhism. It's not like that. You're supposed to think of the principle of truth that's behind you, the universal principle of truth for which you are just like a channel in that moment, because you speak English and you are human beings. So you need a human being speaking English to even hear the meaning, right? So I'm supposed to think of myself like a channel, or almost just like a translator in an international conference. I'm just translating and passing the words through from a much higher place, which is the absolute guru, right? So the relative guru is a person walking around in the flesh like the Dalai Lama. And the absolute guru is the enlightened principles of truth and of teaching that come through that person. And we're taking refuge to both, but mostly to the absolute aspect. And in order to be able to do that, we have to think about it. So that's contemplation meditation. You have to give yourself some arguments. You have to really think about it. Like last week in the news was this thing that these UFO footage was released or something like that. So then you think about it. It's like, do I believe there are UFOs or no? You give yourself arguments, you discuss it. So give yourself some arguments and discuss it in your head or with friends of like, well, do I take refuge in the guru, the universal teacher of truth, or not? And what does it mean to me? And then the realization of taking refuge to the guru is that there's a kind of emotion that comes up. That's the realization. It's this kind of state of like, yes, I got it. And you do it again and again. And then that inner state becomes more and more confirmed and solid to the point where it cannot be taken from you, right? Even if somebody threatens to stab you and stabs you, it cannot be taken away from you. And I'm quite literally taking that example because, Gandhi was killed. He was stabbed by a fanatic Muslim. And he was a very ardent practitioner of the Hindu path, in which the word for God, the divine principle of God, is Ram. And as the attacker, he was on the way to the temple in the mornings to do his morning prayers. As the attacker stabbed him, he stabbed him through the chest, I assume into the lungs and held. He fell to the ground, saying, Ram, Ram, he called for God. So he was so centered in that he didn't say, you asshole, or anything like that. He was not at all on the outside. He was completely on the inside, and he put his mind towards the divine. So that is realization of refuge, right? So it's the same for a Christian. It would be like a Christian, say, drowning, and as they're drowning, I'm literally mean in the water, thinking of Jesus, saying, truly praying to Jesus and trying to merging their mind with their realization and understanding of Jesus. So that's what real refuge is, and you have to work on it. It's like, weightlifting or whatever, in yoga, your push-ups, whatever. It's like mental, emotional muscles you're building up, and then refuge becomes stronger and stronger. And I always try to check my mind when really shocking, sudden things happen. I'm like, well, what did my mind do in that moment? Jimpo always says, man, you're so good, because when I have freaky dreams, my mind always does something nice, like it starts to say mantras or something like that. He's like, man, you never like fight back in a dream or anything like that. Your mind just goes to something nice. And I was quite happy one time. I was really in a bad situation. This is maybe about 5-6 years ago, when we had the first wave of Islamistic terror attacks here in Europe. There was an attack in London at a subway station, and I happened to be at that subway station. And for one moment, I happened to be the person closest to the man with a knife who was screaming he was going to kill us all. And later we were all supposed to call Scotland Yard and report to the detective and whatnot. And one of the questions was that the UK had just started to bomb Syria, and he said like something like, he screamed, "I'll kill you all for Syria," or something like that. And I had heard that, but I didn't, because the moment I realized the danger, I hadn't seen him. It's a confusing thing, like, because there were hundreds of people and I was just walking through them. And next thing, I was on the side where you can't go backwards of these turnstiles in the subway, closest to him, and he was there with his knife. So charming situation. But actually my first gut reaction was twofold. Of course, I ran to the side to hide behind a wall, but as I was doing that, I started to pray for everybody and say mantras. And afterwards I thought that was actually a very cool test on refuge. You know, it's like, what does your mind do in such a moment? Because I really thought I might die. You know, we all thought, you know, I mean, you can see later on YouTube that the security camera footage, and I could see myself run for my life, you know. So, but I was actually quite happy. I said, okay, you know, by the time I had been a Buddhist for 20 years, it's starting to show an effect, you know. And that's kind of like how you're supposed to check in with yourself. If you got stabbed, would you fall to your knees saying Ram Ram? You know, if you got stabbed, would you fall to your knees thinking, not Buddha like some person out there, but that whole principle of what it means inside of you? And talking from personal experience, I mean, they talk about getting enlightened. My personal experience is that as you practice Buddhist meditation, and I can only assume other spiritual paths as well, there's supposed to be an increasing sense of luminosity and light inside of you coming from your heart and spreading through your being. And that should not change whether or not somebody's stabbing you. I guess at this point I should point out that taking refuge doesn't mean somebody's going to stab you. I'm just talking here as an example, okay? So most Buddhists never get stabbed, so it's very rare. So yeah, that's like, I was trying to get into the meditating on refuge. I have a few notes here, I'm just looking. So I talked about the principle of relative and absolute guru. And then the next thing is I take refuge in the Buddha. And there's the same, the relative Buddha is Gautama Buddha, this prince who was born in India, whatever, 2,500 years ago, blah, 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 right? How can he help me? Not very likely to happen. So the principle, the absolute Buddha, is the universal principle of enlightened mind, right? So, and the enlightened mind is taught to be ever present, all pervasive, all knowing. So it's that there's an enlightened presence of all the beings that have reached enlightenment around us at all times, and they're aware of everything. They're aware of me sitting here teaching and all the rest, right? So that's what I'm really taking refuge to. I'm also supposed to actually be taking refuge to my own inner Buddha nature, which is the potential that I can also become enlightened. That's very, very important. I'm supposed to think like, I'm taking refuge to all the enlightened beings, the ones who became Buddhas. I like to say Buddhas and Buddhis. Buddhis is a female, so don't forget, women also got enlightened. So, but also to myself. The reason why I'm saying that is because it's a very male dominant culture and spiritual practice, and women very subtly tend to think they can't become enlightened in this lifetime because they don't have role models, you know. So I like to quite literally say to myself, I take refuge to the female Buddhas. So I create a cause and a reminder for myself to think like, yeah, I can do it too, you know, because they're like me or they were like me. So that's a great advantage, I think, over Christianity, because there are no female Jesuses to my knowledge. So that's taking refuge to the Buddha, the universal principle of becoming enlightened and the potential of becoming enlightened. And then we're supposed to take refuge to the Dharma, because what good is a Buddha and a guru without Dharma? Dharma means the truth. It means the teachings of the truth. I love that. I mean, like when you use faith in human beings and, you know, you hear all these weird stories of what's going on with gurus and stuff, then that may become a little bit tough to take refuge in those aspects. But, you know, for me, the most unflawed is always the teachings of the truth. I mean, we can always take refuge to absolute wisdom and absolute truth. Because if you have any conflict with it, it's not absolute, right? Because absolute is like beyond doubt, completely flawless. Whether or not I can wrap my mind around it is another question, right? But it's this amazing thing that's out there that I'm moving towards with my mind, to stretch my mind, to make it one with that thing. So that's also what I'm supposed to be taking refuge in. And we are taking refuge in the guru and in the Buddha because they are teaching that to us. If the guru and the Buddha were just present, you know, just sitting there meditating, mouth shut, what good would it be? Nothing, you know. They're leading us, they're teaching us by way of language, by way of the Dharma teachings. So I love that part of taking refuge. So, you know, in a nutshell, for Mahayana Buddhists, the main thing you're taking refuge to is, again, bodhicitta, so all-embracing universal compassion, and emptiness, the absolute nature of things, right? And then the last thing we're taking refuge to is the Sangha. And that becomes very hairy because there's two kinds of Sangha. There is the relative and the absolute Sangha. So the relative Sangha is these other Buddhists around, and that gets very annoying because they're all human, so they're completely flawed. And, you know, they say stupid things to you and they get on your nerves and they tell you wrong things and all of that. So there's also a skill even that we have to develop, taking refuge just even in the Sangha, by which I mean the Buddhists that are there in New York right now, right? It's like with friends. Use your wisdom to choose the good ones and hang out with them. And if they're acting strange, well, then don't hang out with them, right? So if they don't make sense, the way they're talking about Buddhism, then don't believe it, right? So in Germany, we have a saying, not everything that shines is gold, you know, so not everybody who runs around saying I'm a Buddhist is a decent Sangha object for you, you know. Even relative Sangha means the people who are true Buddhists, who have a correct understanding and act correctly accordingly, not the confused, screwed up Buddhists who beat you up while telling you they're doing it because it's the Buddhist thing to do. You know, don't do that. I mean, don't fall for that. And there's a lot of it in New York, as you will have noticed. And that's where a lot of naiveness kicks in. I mean, understand that about Christianity, right? Because we've grown up in a Christian culture, and we understand that a lot of people are running around saying, I'm a Christian, and doing very bad things, right? So, hello, time to wake up. It's the same in Buddhism. So, when I say I'm taking refuge to this Sangha, already, even on the level of relative Sangha, I'm supposed to be thinking about the good Buddhist friends, which means the ones who are virtuous and who take you along to the next step to do the next good thing that furthers your practice and your path, not the ones that pull you back. So that's the relative Sangha. And then, of course, there's the absolute Sangha again, which is the universal principle of all those who have gained true realizations on the path or actually gained enlightenment. That gets very fancy. So the absolute, so in a way, the absolute Sangha is the same as the absolute Buddha. It's the enlightened beings that surround us, right? So there are very many ways in which you can think about it. And that is actually, so what I'm talking you through here is just food for thoughts for the refuge meditation that you would be doing. So don't think you like meditation, you don't have to like sit in full lotus and like give yourself a hard time and make yourself feel miserable because you don't think you can look like a good yogini or something like that. So just think that you can do it while you're on the subway or walking in the park or doing your work or whatever. You can just think about it, you know, and you can just reread your notes and reflect on it until you find what works for you. So there's a kind of meditation called contemplation meditation, and there's a kind of meditation that's called analytical meditation. They're a little bit the same, which is where you give yourself good reasons to convince yourself. So I just gave you some reasons and examples. And so that meditation is not one where you have single pointed concentration. It's not a concentration or so-called placement meditation, but one where you talk to yourself in your mind, well, this is like that, and because it's like that, and ooh, that feels good, that doesn't feel good, right? And what I always need to do when I do going for refuge is I need to find for myself the kind of way of expressing it, what I'm going to refuge to that works for me, that moves my heart. You know, if it's just words that in that moment or never really work for me because they don't convey inspiring meaning, then it's no use. So you have to find something that does something to your mind, that picks you up and transports you along to this larger, more spacious, more luminous space of mind and state of mind. Otherwise, you wasted your time, right? So I'm just giving you examples, and ultimately I encourage you to find what works for you, which words work for you, which phrases, which thoughts and examples work for you. And you also need to do that because everything, all the meditations and realizations in Buddhism are always on a spectrum, on a very vast spectrum between non-enlightened, no clue whatsoever about Buddhism, and full enlightenment. And that's a very vast spectrum. And the way how somebody takes refuge and goes for refuge changes all the time. Like your understanding of math changed all the time as you progressed in school, right? It increases all the time and it becomes increasingly refined and sophisticated and powerful. So don't worry. Always start small. And so one thing we need for Buddhism is we need patience. I first learned patience when I worked in an organic farm after I finished school at the age of 19, because we had a hectare full of carrots, organic carrots in rows, and they had to be weeded, and they sent me to weed it. I mean, it's a very odd feeling to stand there at the first carrot in the first row of a whole hectare full of completely weed overgrown carrots with your tool, and to think, I have to weed through this from the start to the end. And what I figured out is, don't think about the end. Just stay in the moment and weed wherever you are, because if you continuously think about where you're headed and how much is left, you're going to get so discouraged. So don't worry so much. Don't worry about where you're headed. I find Western Buddhists tend to be, unlike Asians, very fixated at the end result. You know, it's like, I meditated for 10 seconds. I'm still not having enlightenment style refuge realization yet. What's wrong? Well, you're fixated on the result. So it's all about the journey, you know, and don't worry, you are where you are. It will change all the time, you know. Then life is tough and suddenly your refuge is back to baby stage, you know. And then you have a great inspirational day and you're soaring and you're having the most intense insights into refuge. So it changes all the time. That's normal. It's going to be like the weather. Right now we're still having April weather here, so very much like the weather. Good. I should maybe see up to here if you have any questions. Do you have any questions up to here? No? You can still ask in between and at the end. So I looked through my very old notes and I wanted to read you some little things that some highly realized yogis said. So Lama Supa Rinpoche said about taking refuge, the actual taking refuge in Dharma happens in your heart in the moment when you wish to meditate so as to be free from confusion, ignorance, and anger. So I like that very much. So again, it's like not some outer thing that you say, I'm a Buddhist now. It's totally different. And Lama Yeshe said, taking refuge is the first step on the path to inner freedom. So I really love that. And there's, I think, another one. And then we have refuge vows in Buddhism. So there was a teaching on, for those of you who have refuge vows, what they are for compared to other sets of Buddhist vows is the refuge vows help you not to mess up your karma. So those are just really nice little things that I found. So I thought to read those to you as a little inspirational message. So basically we're going for refuge to also already prevent ourselves from majorly messing up our karma. Karma, because it ripens, and ripening always takes some time, has a future quality, right? Basically you could say refuge vows are there to prevent ourselves from messing up our future, our own future happiness, you know. That's kind of a good motivation, at least for me. Good. So that's the universal principle of taking refuge. So I would also like to teach about the preliminary practice of taking refuge. In Buddhism, there are a bunch of meditations and meditations in action that you do repetitively to create some basic realizations, so you have a good really foundation, like the foundation of a house, to start with your higher practices and higher realizations. And refuge is the first. And it's very bizarre that, you know, if you want to build a house, the first thing is you have to clear the space where it's going to be built, right? And that most Western Buddhists think they're too smart and they can skip that. I mean, you ask any of these Western Buddhists, you know, okay, why don't you skip that step building your house? Just leave the rocks and tree stumps there where you're going to building your house. They're going to say, are you insane? You know, why the heck would I do that? Get the bulldozer, push us to the side so I can really build my nice house. So this is really what I'm trying to sell you. The idea that it might be smart to have a good foundation to build your house on. Why? Because you may find later practices frustrating, boring, the results are not coming along as you wish, obstacles are arising, and all the rest. If you don't have refuge to fall back on, which is literally the point where your baby going, mommy, then next thing you're not going to be a Buddhist anymore, right? So it's not some kind of punishment. Refuge preliminary is not some kind of punishment some lamas thought up to make your life miserable, but it's to put a safety net under you on the path to enlightenment. You know, it's like when these people train these kind of somersaults in the air, swinging on the rings and stuff, they put a safety net under them so they don't fall down and crash. And that's really what this is, very much on the level of your mind and soul. See, Gandhi, do you honestly think it was horrible for him to get stabbed? Not at all, because he took refuge to Ram. For him, that was a profound spiritual experience, being murdered, right? Because he had refuge in his heart. And that's what I mean, like the extreme of having that safety net. You can't fall anymore because suddenly everything becomes part of your path to enlightenment and everything can be transformed. So in the refuge preliminary, you are asked to repeat the refuge mantra 100,000 times. So the refuge mantra is, I go for refuge. I'm saying it in English first, and then there's 3 versions. There's English, Tibetan, or Sanskrit. I go for refuge to the teacher, so to the guru, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. You can say the teacher, the enlightened ones, the teachings on absolute truth, and those who are on the path. I like to actually change the language and the translation to give myself more shades of meanings. You can say it in Tibetan or in Sanskrit. The Sanskrit would be Namo Guru Bhye, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. So Namo means actually, like in Namaste, it means I greet you. So it doesn't mean like I am going for refuge. It means that in the act of greeting the principle of the Guru, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha in your heart, by bowing to that, by paying that respect, by having your ego, you know, humbled and making this gesture of bowing, that's where your heart takes refuge, right? Does that make sense? So because in everything, because Buddhism really has to do with the dismantling of ego and egotistical sense of self, all of these practices, meditations, and preliminaries, if they're done in the right way, they kind of have to do with putting down ego. The biggest one, the real preliminary you do to put down ego, is the prostrations, 100,000 prostrations. That's the one to lay down ego. So the big one to lay down ego, but there's always, I said, everything has always got to do with everything else. So of course, there's also an element of that in taking refuge. So you can pick whichever language you want, because it's not about the exact sound of whichever letter, but it's about the meaning. So even if you do the Sanskrit and you just say it like a robot, blah, 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 and you don't think about the meaning, it's not going to be very effective, if at all. If you do it in English, in the most common language and words, but you give it deep meaning as you're reflecting, as you're saying it, it will be very powerful. It is said that if you use the Sanskrit or the Tibetan, because so many beings have recited it before you, that there's already kind of like a, a morphic field. If you are remembering the morphic field theory, that there's already a vibrant blueprint in the cosmos that you can tap into, that can nurture you doing it in that language. And yeah, I like to say there's no right or wrong. You do what works for you. It's like when people ask me which diet should I stick to, to lose weight. I'm like, the one that you're gonna stick to. I don't care which one it is. At least if you stick to it and you lose weight, that's the one you should do, So it's the same with refuge. You use the method that works for you. And so you're going to have your mala and you're going to move the bead one for the 4 lines. So it's basically a mantra with these 4 lines. So it's kind of slow. It's a long mantra. And you have to do, you're supposed to always do 100,000 plus 10%. So you do 100,000, 111,111. I just lost Michelle. I guess I forgot to give you guys a pee break. Maybe we should do it here. Anybody else needs to go to the toilet? Yeah, Amy. Okay, so let's just take a tea break. We'll come back to the counting aspect in 5 minutes. What was that noise? Who is clunking around? We don't know, so maybe it's Michelle. Sorry, I forgot to look. So one of you has to tell me when 5 minutes are over. I didn't look.
Sorry, Julia, I turned off my video because my internet was slowing, and sometimes when you turn off the video, it helps. So
That's fine. Okay. So yeah, in the refuge preliminary, because it's Buddhist refuge, I think it could be done in a very similar way in other spiritual traditions as well. You, of course, also have a Buddha in front of you. So when I did it, I had a little postcard with the historical Buddha. So somebody just sent me, actually Michelle just sent me a calendar, and here he is, the historical Buddha. So you can have a statue or a postcard or a picture, and you're saying the mantra, and you're having the Buddha opposite of you. This is very basic Buddhist psychology of projection. You are putting yourself in the position where you're projecting your own enlightened potential in front of you. And the most basic way of visualizing, of meditating, is to visualize the Buddha. I mean, you can also look from time to time, and then again, more focus on seeing the Buddha with your mind's eye in golden color, sending you white light, right? So sending you white light, so you're giving yourself an energy healing here. The white light enters into you and washes you clean. So whatever limitations you think you have, whatever feelings of inequality, inadequateness, or misery, or disease, or whatever, it all goes to that until everything is completely white, bright, and clean on the inside. You can either do the visualization in your physical body or visualizing yourself as being in your energy body. So, for instance, if you had a disease such as a cancer, they would say you focus on, the light going there and always seeing the cancer go away and dissolving and everything being perfect, healed, clean, bright light, happy and joyous. And you can do that one-pointedly, but most of us don't have one-pointed concentration. So you can change these things, You can, for instance, start by thinking a little bit while you're saying these 4 things one after the other, and it will become second nature and just go in the background after a while. Think first of why you're taking refuge at all, then going refuge to the guru, then you think a little bit about going refuge to the Buddha, then you think a little bit about going for refuge to the Dharma, then to the Sangha, then you think a little bit about the Buddha, what that means, and then you think about, light. I'm just giving you examples. You're doing that whole visualization. And then after you become completely clean in your feeling, so this is the first step of purification, then the Buddha sends golden light. So white light stands for purification, golden light stands for wisdom. So now that you've been cleaned from mental defilements, you can be filled with the golden light of wisdom. So now you think that the golden light comes towards you and literally fills you, this clean whiteness that was your body, up completely, so it turns golden. But we're never talking about solidity, but the nature of light. We're talking about white light and golden light, right? And It's always good at the end to confirm it with a feeling. So white light comes, you see all of that, and then you, at the end, you think, now I'm completely pure. Then, you know, the golden light comes, you turn completely golden, and you think, now I'm filled with wisdom, right? So wisdom of what? Wisdom of the Dharma, of endless kinds of Dharma. And then if you really do this as a mantra counting preliminary, you'll be sitting there for many hours. Then you may have to think again about like taking refuge, and you can take any of the other Lamrim topics. Why am I taking refuge? Because, you know, death is certain to come, but the time of death is uncertain. So I should be like trying to place my trust into spirituality, or because I'll be getting enlightened faster so I can help others in an ultimate sense. Whatever it is, you know, you can switch between these kind of contemplation meditations where you think, give yourself reasons for why it's a good idea, where you're inspiring yourself about going for refuge, and the visualization. And at the very end of the session, which can be as long as you want, and for beginners, usually you don't have the same stamina as much later, you do it less, you do it 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is. Like average for a session in retreat is between half an hour, 1 hour. Once you become really good, you do 1.5, 2 hours per session. That's much later. So here for refuge, I think half an hour is good. And so at the end, then you think as the last thing, maybe you've already finished however many mantras you want to say, Buddha comes to your head, you know, turns around, so facing the same way as you, and merges into you, like melts into you. And the scriptures say at the speed of a hot butter cutting, melting through butter. Sorry, a hot knife melting through butter, just kind of like this, sinks into your heart. And then you have Buddha in your heart, which again is not the historical Prince Gautama, but the universal principle of the enlightened teacher. Becomes one with your heart chakra, and he sits there in your heart chakra. And then you take a moment to affirm that, saying, yes, you know, it's like, it's there, he's there. You can say she is there, you can say it is there, you know. You don't have to genderify it. So, and then you try to hold on to these feelings and the energy of the session as you get up, you know, and try to merge it, carry it over into the rest of the day. And in the Buddhist preliminary of taking refuge, you do that for as long as it takes for you to say 111,111 malas. So most mantras. So most malas have 108 beads. So you will have to say 100,000 plus a bit. You can do the math. Because after you do, sorry, did I say 100,000? You have to do it 1,000 times. Then you'll have done 108,000 mantras, but you have to do 111,111. So what you'll have to do if you want to do it as a preliminary is you have to keep like a piece of paper and mark. So different people have different techniques. If every time, you know, they finish the mala, they do one mark, or they count on their hands 1, 2, 3, 4. I did it 5 times, and then when the session is over, they mark 5. So everybody has to find their own way. There's certain mala counting things you can string onto your mala as well. And I really love it. I really love mantra counting retreats because it comes back to the universal principle of sound being spiritual, which this all comes out of Indian culture. And Indian culture says Nada Brahma, the universe originated out of sound, right? And it is taught that the sound, the vibration of the mantra has a changing effect on the channels, the psychic nerves of the energy body. And I love mantra counting retreats because it's like you're bathing in the sound, and the repetitiveness of it becomes trance-like, which if you study trance dancing or chanting, it's the same. It's like you do it over and over and over again until you start to kind of like hover. I don't know. There's a special sensation that is created when you do a mantra counting retreat. And I was saying last time, I don't know when I just said it lately, that the whole preliminary practices, they're not supposed to be a punishment, but a training. And the refuge visualization and meditation is so simple and so basic. It's the best training for later higher retreats and stuff. So it's really, really great to build up your muscles to do further practice. And it feels great. It feels so lovely to just sit there and bathe in the light. It's like white light, golden light, everything is nice. I loved it. I was kind of like upset when I was done with my count. It's a very long time ago when I was a baby Buddhist, because it felt so nice. I didn't want to stop, so I can just really encourage you to do it. And then, and then you also have this foundation of saying, no matter what happens, I get knocked back down onto the good, solid foundation of my refuge, of my inner refuge in my heart, where I know I can help myself. If nothing else, I can do that meditation and say that mantra and remember the feelings, associations, and realizations I had along with that. And it's very no nonsense. It's very simple. The basis of visualization is this image of Gautama Buddha, where he touches the earth. This is called the earth touching mudra. So this is the first recorded position of the Buddha, where he sits down and he touches the earth when he's challenged by the oppositional spiritual forces, saying like, haha, you're not really enlightened, and who do you think you are? He touches the earth and says, the earth is my witness. And that shut up the oppositional, Mara, which can be translated as demon, because the earth was the historical Buddha's witness. She had witnessed that everything was true. Now, I think this is also very symbolic. The earth is the element that is the foundation and the solidity, right? So if you can walk out of refuge practice where you can touch the earth and say, it's like knock on wood, but knock on wood is like, I hope so, I hope nothing goes wrong. But if you can get to the point where you can touch the earth and says, I touch earth because the earth is my witness that I have truly taken refuge, and you cannot shake it, no matter what you do in my face, then you have done a good refuge retreat. Good. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say. And you don't need to do it as a retreat. You can do it as a morning or evening practice, or every once in a while. It's very good to do it on a regular basis because it creates momentum. you know, the more you do it every day at the same time, or in the retreat form where you do it 4 times a day, the sessions pretty much at the same time, it creates tremendous momentum. This is not the kind of thing where you have to cut yourself off from the rest of the world. You can do it while you're working, while you're going about ordinary business. You just say, well, I decide every morning I'm doing it between 6 and 7, or every evening from 9 to 10, or instead of watching the news or whatever, right? And there's a tremendous power that comes out of this repetition, doing it again and again. And the rhythm builds up strength, and it can become quite lovely and powerful. Yeah. So that's the best I can say about taking refuge at this point. And yeah, do you have any questions?
Good. Thank you, and so much for everything. And I wondered if you wouldn't mind to go through the Tibetan of the refuge prayer.
Well, okay, I hope you can figure out the spelling. Lamala Kyapsuchiwo Sangye La Kyapsuchiwo Chö La Kyapsuchiwo. I'm totally going blank now on the last one. I don't know. I find it extremely hard to always juggle so many languages. Gendun La Kyapsuchiwo. So there, Tibetan, like German, has these umlaut vowels. You also have them in French language. You don't have them in English language. So it's not Gendun, it's Gendun La Kyapsuchiwo. I'm sure you can Google it. Nowadays you can Google everything.
Thank you. I have it as well. I just thought that it is nice to hear through you.
Yeah. So that's of course also something that it's considered more powerful to do a mantra recitation if you've had the mantra transmission from someone who's actually practiced the mantra, so recited it a lot of times, because that's what gives it power. So that's a good idea. So if you want to, I mean, I qualify in the basic way that I have recited it the correct number of times to fulfill the refuge preliminary, which is 111,111 times. I can't go to the door right now. And so if you want to, I can speak it now. So the mantra transmission it works in the following, that the person who has received it, which I cannot recall right now, but I'm pretty sure that I received the transmission from the abbot of Kopan Monastery at the time, a very, very wonderful yogic lama. And so there's always this thing of, did you receive it from the lineage of people who are practicing, and then you can give it on to the next. And the way it's done is, as I'm speaking it bit by bit, you repeat it after me, and then you're part of the lineage. This is how it is passed on. So if you want to, I'm not sure it was Lama Lundrup, I think it was Lama Lundrup, the lineage, we can do that.
That would be wonderful.
So I will do it in Sanskrit. So Namo Guru Bhye,
Namo Guru Bhye,
Namo Buddhaya,
Namo Guraya,
Namo Dharmaya,
Namo Dharmaya,
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
So usually you do it 3 times. So all of you can do it if you want to. If you don't want to, you don't have to. So again, Namo Guru Bhye,
Namo Guru Bhye,
Namo Buddhaya,
Namo Buddhaya,
Namo Dharmaya,
Namo Dharmaya,
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Sanghaya,
Namo Guru Bhye,
Namo Guru Bhye,
Namo Buddhaya,
Namo Buddhaya,
Namo Dharmaya,
Namo Dharmaya,
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
Good. So imagine that this stream of consciousness and blessings from the original origin of this mantra all the way through me reaches you now, and you're part of that stream of lineage transmission and blessings. So, and that then you can rejoice and think that that's going to make your practice more powerful and help your realizations as well. And again, it's not me, it's always just, we are just a vehicle for the higher principles, right? Yeah.
So so presumably the prayer was originally in Sanskrit.
So yes, the idea is that okay, so there are 2 big components of Mahayana Buddhism, which is the Sanskrit scriptures, which is called the Kangyur, which means Ka means word of the Buddha, which means the words of the Buddha. So they were original in Sanskrit. Okay, it seems that there's a huge fight amongst scholars as to whether it was originally in Sanskrit or Pali, or part in Sanskrit and part in Pali, and I'm not even interested in that. Anyhow, whatever Indian language and script.
Right.
And then there's another huge amount of scriptures volume, that's the so-called Tengyur. Tengyur is the teachings given by Tibetan Indian Pandits or Tibetan masters that are interpreting the Buddha's words. The Buddha's words, that's sutras and things like that. And then there's it, so Kangyur and Tengyur. And I don't know what the oldest mention is of this refuge formula. I can imagine it being very old and going back to the original time of the Buddha. Why? So it's my educated guess now as a pretty well-educated Buddhist. Why? Is because they were already ordaining people, and you need to have some kind of formulas like that, speech formulas like that for ceremonies, and there were ordination ceremonies. So I think it's very old. So I'm assuming it comes from that time, if not from the Indian Middle Ages, like year 800, around that time. So one way or another, it would have originally been in an Indian language and then later with the transmission of the Dharma to Tibet around 1200, it would have been translated into Tibetan. Any other question? Doesn't have to be just about this.
No, I mean, the thing about that to me that's interesting is not so much which language, but just that as you said, it's the vibration. So the resonance of the sound is.
Yeah.
So
I mean, for you, because you're born and grew up in India, you should definitely do it in Sanskrit because that's where your karmic connection is, you know.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was given it originally in Tibetan, but no one ever, recited it for me. So anyway, but the resonance of the Sanskrit is makes a deeper impression on me. In fact, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I vibrate more with it. So thank you.
Yeah. So, and of course, the whole underlying gist of Indian spirituality is the merging into oneness with the divine, right? So ultimately, if I had to just shorten and squeeze this entire class of 2 hours into one sentence, it's about sitting there and merging your mind into oneness with the divine. That's what it all means. So you can also just contemplate on that or let it happen.
Right.
So do you have any questions, Rika? Okay. Okay. So if there are no more questions, we can just finish, or we can just switch to chatting and we can chat a little. It's not too bad. I don't get to see you guys this year, and already not last year, I'm kind of like missing it all a lot. So usually this time of year, I'm in New York. So Rika, you have to go out and say hello to me for the burdocks and the Star of Bethlehem's in the park, okay? I'm walking here, I'm like, oh, Prospect Park will look like this now, this time of year, you know? Do you remember on the other side of from where you live, there's a lot of red chestnuts, the buckeyes, the red blooming buckeyes?
They're on the other side?
Yeah, when you walk in from the Park Slope side, there's this huge, these kind of meadow-like things, and they have a lot of like red flowering buckeyes, so I'm missing them. Yeah, I see, she knows. So you all have to say hi from the plants in spring for me over there. I'm really missing them a lot. So
it's going to be 90 degrees tomorrow.
Roses too now.
My God, and it's so cold here. I cannot plant my zucchinis outside because they're going to get a, temperature shock.
Yeah, you were saying it was April weather, and it suddenly just flew up here.
Really?
Well, today it's going to go into the 80s, and tomorrow it's going to be 88 or something. Tomorrow's going to be 90.
Yeah, usually it's Pentecost weekend, and so we in Germany actually have Monday off. It's vacation for the Christians, right? And usually this is where everybody goes to the beach because it's the first really hot, sunny, wonderful weekend. And I mean, you've grown up in Kiel, I remember as a student being on the beach for this weekend and swimming for the first time and stuff like that. I mean, it is freezing here. I had to turn on the radiator on the highest to even be able to teach in this room. And I have cold feet now, so it's like just unforgiving. Yeah, no, it's terrible. So it's a little bit hard to argue for global warming right now, but we have to see it in the larger picture, Yeah. Yeah. So nice to see your cat, Amy.
Yes, she really wanted to hear the teachings too. She's very,
That's so funny, you know.
yeah, she loves it.
That's great. Yeah. So good. I just hope you can all find this helpful on whatever level. And if you never do the formal practice, it doesn't matter either, because we're back to, it's just a state of mind, you know. It's about, the formal practice is just an outer template that helps you become familiar with this state of mind and stay with it, stay in it continuously, and then you can drop the outer template. You don't need it anymore, and that's the realization. Good. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and I hope to see you soon.
We
Thank you.
wish we could just fly you over real quick.
Oh, anytime. I don't even know if, I don't think we are out of lockdown yet. Ugh.
Yeah.
At first you were more like restricted than us, and now they just won't let us out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
All right.
good.
Thank you.
Lots of love. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Michelle, for hosting.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for teaching.
Yeah.
Please keep
Yeah,
teaching us.
thank you. Yeah, I don't have any idea right now. So, but you guys can ask for things. That was